Welcome, and thanks for joining us to help choose home when care is needed, a podcast all about the benefits, value, and safety of receiving care and services in the one place that feels most comfortable, wherever it is that the person needing care calls home. I'm your host, Marilee Orsini, and I've been involved in healthcare at home since 1981. Before we meet today's guest, a brief thank you to our sponsors and partners, the National Association for Home Care and Hospice, Access, and CoreQ. Today's episode is number 15 of Season 3. Our guest today is Michelle Woodbrey, CEO and co-founder of Two Sisters Senior Living Advisors, a referral and consulting service that specializes in helping families navigate senior living and care options. Please help me want you and welcome Michelle Woodbrey to Help Choose Home. Well, first, Michelle, thank you so very much for joining us today. And I'd love to start the podcast with you just telling me a little bit about what your business is and what you do and how you help seniors.
Sure. Well, I am the CEO and co-owner of a company called Two Sisters Senior Living Advisors, and we are a team of consultants who help families find the best senior care options available. So my sister and I grew up in the long-term care industry with both of our parents having worked in senior health care. And so what we do now with our team is really help people navigate how to choose what care option is the right one, what time, and then how to find the right provider.
And can you walk me through that process?
Well, it depends. I mean, it's different for every person, but we start with an initial phone conversation. And from there, we spend about 15 minutes on the phone with somebody and get a sense of where they're at now with their loved one. It's usually an adult child that calls us, but we do get calls from seniors themselves and people who are inquiring for a spouse or another relative. And then we get a sense of where they're at now and what their needs are now and what their goals might be for their aging. And some people haven't defined them yet. and that's okay. We can help walk people through and understand what goals are possible and what goals they may want to achieve. Of course, one of those, and a major one, is to stay home. And I think that's the focus of your podcast, and it is an increasing focus of our practice as well.
And can you give me some examples of successful stay-at-home clients that you've helped?
Sure. I mean, there are people who typically plan ahead. Staying at home doesn't often happen by accident, we have found. So failing to plan is planning to fail is true. And I speak with families and seniors, and I've heard from so many people, well, I'm going to leave this house feet first. And my response is often, well, that's a respectable goal, and I can understand that, but let's plan for it, because if you don't, I'm afraid that won't happen for you, because too many times a senior who is reluctant to plan for that and just assumes that no matter what, I'm going to stay home, will be the ones that find themselves in a hospital or rehab and without the ability to go home because somebody with a license on the line is preventing them from going into an unsafe situation. The seniors that we've worked with who have most successfully been able to stay at home are the ones who have planned for that. And that looks like understanding what your budget is, what available funds you might have to pay for care, and what are the options. So what's the least expensive home care option, and what could it possibly get to in a worst case scenario financially? And that's the first thing I think to take a look at. And if it doesn't look like in a worst case scenario, home will still be a viable option, then we work on coming up with some backup plans in case that isn't the case. Always hoping, of course, that the initial plan to stay home does work. But if financially it looks viable even if that means, finagling things or downsizing and making an initial move or considering a creative financial solution like a reverse mortgage or something like that, then that requires some time and advanced planning. And so they're able to do that. Also, home modification may be necessary. And may be necessary in the future, but understanding what would it take in order to successfully stay in my home if the worst case scenario happened, not just financially, but with regard to the physical location and the logistics itself. So those people who have successfully stayed at home had a support system that they put in place, whether that was a support system made up of friends and family and neighbors, which is often the case. And if that is the case, then again, having a backup plan is important because all of those people might have other things going on in their lives that make it so that they can't help that person stay at home, or whether it is through, with professional assistance, that support system. But people aren't typically successful at staying at home if on their own, if they don't have a support system to help them do that. So the clients that we've worked with, and short answer, the clients that we've worked with who are successfully aging in place at home plan to do so and have a good support system to help implement those plans.
You've talked about making certain that you have finances available and making certain that you have a good support system in place. And we've also mentioned that a lot of people don't think about planning ahead. So and I know this is a ballpark question, but if you were looking at your finances and trying to decide, can I stay at home? What range of assets would one need to have?
Well, I think that is going to vary based on the location in the country. My business is out of Massachusetts, and we are one of the most expensive states for long-term care in the United States. And so our figures would look different, but the formula, I imagine, might be similar. And so what we look at is breaking down and trying to compare, apples and oranges and broccoli, if you will, but with three totally different types of care options. And one is how much, if you calculate how much it costs to stay at home, if you still have a mortgage or if you are renting, then what is that? And food costs, utility costs, homeowners or renters insurance, property taxes, and then the care and the home maintenance. Up here, we have to worry about snow removal and all of that stuff. How much does it cost to stay at home? And then and then we can factor in care. For us, for many people, when somebody needs 4 or 5 hours of home care per day, and oftentimes, especially since COVID, most of the home care providers have increased their minimums to reduce the amount of staff coming in and out of people's homes. They've increased the minimum. So 4 or 5 hours of home care is about what a daily rate in assisted living costs. Now, that's a very generic number because it depends on what your needs are, what assisted living you choose, and a few other factors. But if somebody needs more home care than it may cost to move to an assisted living, and it doesn't look like they have the finances to stay home with 24-hour care, because that's the worst case scenario when we work backwards, is if you need 24-hour in-home awake staff in your house, what does that cost and how long can your assets sustain that? And that's a question that a financial advisor can help figure out, or you have other professionals. That's not my area of expertise, but that number is what we know we have to work with. If it's not indefinitely or for a long enough period of time, then looking at what the alternative might be and when that scale tips is really the critical factor. So again, for many people, when assisted living becomes a less expensive option than staying at home, then maybe a move like that is advisable at that time. And if that isn't going to be a possibility, if staying home and assisted living isn't going to offset the cost enough to help keep somebody from having to live long-term in a skilled nursing facility, then that's a different set of calculations. But the goal would be then to spend down at home and plan ahead by getting on, in our area, most of the really well-performing nursing homes have wait lists, especially now. So planning ahead and getting on wait lists for skilled nursing, if that's what someone may need in the future. But it's not a number that I can give you. It's more of a calculation that you have to look at. At what point is the scale tipped that my staying at home is increasing the chances that I will have to go to a nursing home versus maybe being able to go to an assisted living?
So when you talked about 4 to 5 hours of care at home, or when you exceed that, you are moving into sort of an equal cost in assisted living. Does your calculation include all of those factors you previously mentioned, rent, mortgage?
Yeah, so if you look at, in our area, I use the number 25. It is higher than that, but math is easier with using the number 25. But if home care is about $25 an hour, and you have, it's 4 to 6 hours of care per day, that is what the equivalent of a daily rate in assisted living might cost. And with an assisted living, your meals are included, your utilities are included, housekeeping services are, and in many cases, some care is also included. And so you're getting more for your money in many circumstances with that scenario. But the scale is going to be different for everybody based on what their care needs are and what their budget is.
Right. And someone who is not on a limited income and has enough assets to have as much care as they would like at home, in those scenarios, do you simply work with them to stay at home?
Yeah, and there's a number of ways to do that. An increasingly popular way is something called extended stay caregiving, or the terminology is often a live-in caregiver. But interestingly enough, if you look at the technicality of it, if you have a live-in caregiver, they might have tenant rights, and if you aren't happy with that caregiver and you would like to find another caregiver, but they don't have anywhere to go, then it's possible that you may have to go through an eviction process, at least here in Massachusetts. And so live-in caregivers are a little bit less popular, even though that's what they tend to be called. But extended stay caregiving is when you have one caregiver for 4 days and another caregiver for 3 days, and they are living in your house. And staying there and cooking for you and helping clean and offering transportation and any care that you may need. But you have two people essentially, especially now with COVID. It's an increasingly popular way to go because you really are reducing the number of people coming in and out of your home. And that's also helping those caregivers not have to have multiple jobs, and it's keeping them from going in and out of a lot of different facilities, which is, I think, one of the things that we found was spreading COVID through these facilities. At least when the first wave went through, that was what we learned.
And the other point that you mentioned that is crucial is the support system. And I'm not certain that someone might understand what kinds of support does that support system need to provide for the person at home. Let's say they're getting 4 to 5 hours of care, of home care. What other, and looking at neighbors and family to provide the rest of the support, who coordinates that and what kind of support are we talking about?
Well, it can vary. I think that there are some seniors who feel they have a good support system. And when they call us, we talk through what that looks like, and they have great neighbors, and they have, some people that they know from their church. And when we further inquire, it turns out that many of those people might also be older or have families of their own. And it's difficult if somebody is requiring 4 or 5 hours of care per day or more. Their needs are fairly high with regard to how do they get their groceries, How do their groceries become meals? How do they clean their apartment? How do they safely navigate when they don't have a caregiver? What is their safety awareness? All of these things, somebody has to sort of be monitoring. A good home care company, many home care companies have case managers and have a point person that oversees that person in the absence of having a strong family member or other person who is spearheading their support system. But that's not always adequate because there's a lot of communication that has to happen between doctors and medication management. And those are the things that really get complicated. That's when neighbors and friends typically back away when somebody needs that level, because I don't want to necessarily use the word burden, but it becomes difficult and emotionally, it becomes a difficult thing, as well as in terms of managing time, which is, if I'm not mistaken, the one thing that we all really could use more of. So being a caregiver or a point person for a friend or a neighbor, even for people who are extraordinarily well-intentioned, can become hard, especially if you're talking about needing 4 or 5 hours of care. So if somebody doesn't have family, then there are professionals that are available that you can hire, aging life care professionals. They used to be called geriatric care managers, but somebody who you can keep on retainer to help oversee your ongoing care needs can be an important part of your life. If your goal is to stay at home, that may be a necessary part of that.
This has been a very helpful conversation. I am certain that people who are thinking about home care have not considered some of the things that you've talked about today. And we're close to the end of our time. So is there any one word of wisdom or a words of wisdom that you could give our listening audience? So if they want to choose home, that would be the first step that they would need to do when they know they have a care need on the horizon?
Yep. I like to always say it is better to have a plan in place and not need it than to need a plan and not have one.
Excellent. Very good. Well, Michelle, thank you so much. And I wish you such success in what you're doing. We're all working together to try to make staying at home as positive as can be and an option for more. So I really appreciate your time today.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening today. And a special thanks to our sponsors and partners, National Association for Home Care and Hospice, Access, and 4Q. If you've not done so already, please subscribe to our podcast and take the time to leave a review on Apple Podcast. We are now also on Spotify and most other places where you find podcasts. Like and follow us on social media and join us, won't you, to spread the word and help choose home when care is needed.